Tonight, we journey into one of the darkest corners of early American history, to an age when the new republic was still raw and unsteady. Its promise of liberty competing with the ambitions of those ruthless enough to seize opportunity. The ink on the Constitution was barely dry when whispers began to drift through the parlors and alleys of Charleston, rumors of a family whose sudden rise to wealth seemed unnatural, of midnight gatherings and strange lights in the marshes, and of people who vanished without a trace. This is the story of the Bellamy Dynasty and the secret that built their fortune. In 1790, South Carolina's coast glittered with the riches of rice and trade. Charleston bustled with merchants, planters, and politicians. Carriages rattled over cobblestones, and silk-clad ladies strolled beneath parasols. Yet beneath the veneer of gentility, older powers stirred in the swamps, where African spirits whispered through the trees and behind locked doors. The wealthy dabbled in mysteries far removed from the church. No family embraced these mysteries more completely than the Bellamys of Raven's Rest Plantation, 20 miles northwest of the city. By day, their white-columned mansion perched on a rise above endless green-gold rice fields embodied southern prosperity. By night, when the moon was high, it became something else entirely. Thaddeus Bellamy had arrived from London in 1760, a modest man with a weathered ship called the Midnight Star. Within a year, he had built a thriving trade route between Charleston, Jamaica, and Barbados. Where others lost ships to storms and pirates, his always returned heavy with cargo. Some said he could predict the weather, others that he had struck bargains with pirates. A few whispered he performed strange rituals when the moon vanished from the sky. By 1775, he had grown wealthy enough to buy Raven's Rest, a crumbling estate abandoned by its English master. Most curious of all was an ancient stone building at the property's edge, shunned by locals who called it the house where shadows live. Thaddeus had it cleared, refitted with iron brackets, and placed a massive oak table in its center. He claimed it was for processing a special strain of rice that required lunar phases, but no one believed him. When war came, his plantation flourished, while others withered. His ships slipped through the British blockade. His crops never failed. His enslaved laborers worked in eerie silence, utterly obedient. Once, each new moon, Thaddeus would take a strong young man into the stone house. None ever returned, and he claimed they had been sent away to work on his ships. By 1790, Raven's Rest spanned 5,000 acres, its manor gleaming, its gardens blooming with strange flowers that filled the night with a sweet, suffocating perfume. Thaddeus, now 60, was lean and sharp-eyed, his voice smooth and commanding, his silvering hair lending him distinction. His wife, Constance, 20 years younger, was pale raven-haired and reclusive, always wearing dark colors and a silver pendant etched with symbols no one recognized. They had 3 children, Nathaniel tall and imposing like his father, Victoria, whose beauty mirrored her mother, and Thomas, a boy of 16 with the features of both. The Bellamys cultivated an image of generosity, donating to churches, schools, orphanages, and hospitals. Their wealth seemed endless, and Charleston's elite admired them without daring to question the source. Their parties were legendary, with a mansion full of exotic treasures, Egyptian jars, African masks that seemed to shift when stared at, and carved stones depicting rituals better left undescribed. Guests dined on delicacies spiced with ingredients from distant lands, while rumors whispered just beyond the glow of the chandeliers. Why did no slave ever escape Raven's Rest? Why maintain that ancient stone house? And what happened on nights when the moon disappeared and no one was allowed near? The answers began to take shape in early 1790 with the arrival of Dr. Jonathan Blackwood, a Scottish physician fleeing scandal and seeking a fresh start. His journals, discovered decades later, reveal a mind unafraid to cross the blurred line between science and the occult, convinced that the boundaries of life and death were meant to be broken. Blackwood once wrote that the electrical spark animating the body and the essence that departs with our last breath are not supernatural forces, but natural processes we do not yet understand, and what can be understood can be controlled. In person, he was striking tall and broad-shouldered with a shock of prematurely white hair above a youthful, intelligent face. He dressed with simple elegance, favoring dark colors that suited his serious nature. His large, steady hands spoke of a surgeon's discipline, and his gray eyes, cold as the North Sea, missed nothing. His Edinburgh accent, softened by time, charmed Charleston society as he established his medical practice, quickly gaining a reputation for progressive treatments that succeeded where others failed. Fevers and infections yielded to his tinctures, though some patients whispered of vivid dreams after taking them. At a spring ball in the governor's mansion, celebrating South Carolina's ratification of the Constitution, he first encountered Victoria Bellamy. The ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight music floated through the air, and among all the elegance, Victoria stood apart. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, calm and calculating, watching the room as if it were a chessboard. She wore a Parisian gown of deep crimson that flirted with scandal, and around her throat hung a silver pendant etched with strange, intricate symbols. When their eyes met, Blackwood felt an inexplicable pull, a recognition of something kindred. He crossed the floor, asked her for a dance, and the two moved together so gracefully that the crowd paused to watch. They barely spoke as they danced, speaking instead in glances and the touch of hands. When the music ended, Victoria smiled and said softly, "You're not like the others, Dr. Blackwood. You see beyond the veil." When he asked what veil she meant, she replied, "The illusion that we understand the world and our place in it. These people think they live important lives, but there are greater powers at work. I think you already know that." Before he could respond, Thaddeus Bellamy appeared at her side, his silvered hair gleaming. "Victoria, you must introduce me to your new acquaintance," he said with a knowing look. From that evening on, Blackwood found his thoughts haunted by her words. Dissatisfied with the limitations of conventional science, he began visiting Raven's Rest under the pretext of medical service, eager to glimpse Victoria and perhaps the answers she hinted at. His first visit was to attend Constance Bellamy, who was said to suffer from migraines. He arrived on a warm April morning, the air thick with magnolia and the low hum of bees. A middle-aged slave met him at the door, a man with blank, unfocused eyes and a flat voice that lacked the natural cadence of speech as he said, "The mistress awaits you in her chambers, doctor. Follow me." The house was unnaturally silent, as though it absorbed sound. Constance's room was dim curtains drawn and scented with an incense that was foreign to him. She lay on a canopied bed, pale and beautiful. Her dark hair spread across the pillows like spilled ink. "Dr. Blackwood," she murmured with surprising strength, "how kind of you to attend me." The examination that followed was unlike any he had ever given. Her answers were cryptic, almost philosophical, as though every question was a test. She spoke of time as something flexible and of her pain as knowledge pressing to be released. At one point, she grasped his wrist with a sudden strength and said, "Your heart beats with remarkable steadiness. It suggests a disciplined man, or perhaps a man touched by something extra." Thaddeus seemed to welcome Blackwood's presence, even inviting him to dinner. There he noticed peculiar habits. Before every meal, the family drank a bitter tea from tarnished silver cups engraved with unknown symbols. The servants moved with silent, unnatural coordination. And once in the dining room mirror, he thought he saw Thaddeus's reflection hold still a fraction longer than the man himself. After dinner, the men retired to Thaddeus's study, a grand room, filled floor to ceiling with books in languages both ancient and unrecognizable. Cases displayed relics from every corner of the world. Egyptian scarabs, Roman coins, stone arrowheads, tablets carved with strange cuneiform, and a dagger with a curved blade, so dark it seemed to swallow the light, its handle wrapped in golden wire etched with runes. The air smelled of leather and smoke, and shadows flickered across the walls from the roaring fire. Thaddeus poured brandy and regarded him thoughtfully. "You seem a man of considerable learning, Dr. Blackwood," he said. "Edinburgh is a fine school, but I sense your studies were unconventional." Blackwood admitted to pursuing ideas others considered radical. "Unorthodox enough to cost you Scotland," Thaddeus said with a thin smile. "But here, a man of vision may explore without constraint." "Tell me, Doctor, have you continued your experiments since arriving?" The question startled him. He had been careful not to speak of his past. "I make it my business to know about interesting newcomers," Thaddeus continued smoothly, gesturing at the books and artifacts. "These are not mere curiosities. They hold secrets about life and death, time and dimension, secrets long suppressed by the church. Perhaps you, like me, are willing to look beyond the veil." Blackwood's gaze fell on a small greenish metal statue of a seated figure with the head of a bird, its surface shifting in the firelight. He felt its presence as though it were alive. "Ah, yes," Thaddeus said softly. "A gift from an associate in New Orleans." Thaddeus held the small metal idol with reverence, explaining that it represented one of the Loa, the old spirits carried to these shores by enslaved Africans, gods of crossroads and hungry thresholds between worlds. In the islands, they called him Baron Samedi, but the name was only the latest in a lineage far older. When he passed the figurine to Blackwood, the doctor was startled by its unexpected weight and the chill that seeped into his skin, despite the heat of the fire. The metal seemed to hum faintly, as if something alive stirred within, and for an instant he imagined the bird-headed figure turned its face toward him. Blinking the vision away, he forced a measured tone. "Remarkable craftsmanship," he said, returning it carefully. "The level of detail implies an advanced tradition." Thaddeus set it back in its glass case with care, his smile never touching his eyes. "Primitive cultures," he said, "often know truths we ignore. They understand that what we see is only the surface of a deeper reality, a world of unseen forces." "Do you believe in the old gods, Doctor?" The question settled like a weight between them. Blackwood hesitated, aware that one answer would be safe, and another would open a dangerous door. At last he said that history is stranger than we like to admit, and that whether these powers were divine or natural, humanity has never fully understood them. Thaddeus's smile deepened. "A diplomatic answer, but some truths require experience." He raised his glass to open minds. Before Blackwood could respond, the door to the study crashed open, and Nathaniel Bellamy stormed in his usually handsome face, flushed and disordered clothes, in disarray, his eyes wide with fear. "Father, there's been an incident at the witch house. Jenkins says it cannot wait." Thaddeus changed instantly. The gracious host stripped away to something cold and coiled. "What kind of incident?" "One of the subjects reacted badly to the treatment," Nathaniel said, glancing uneasily at Blackwood. "The usual remedies have failed." Thaddeus's eyes darkened. "Show me." He excused himself with crisp politeness and swept out, leaving Nathaniel alone with the doctor. The younger man poured a brandy with shaking hands and downed it in one gulp. "So you're the doctor who keeps calling on my sister," he said bluntly. "Victoria has spoken of you." Blackwood replied carefully that he admired her intellect. Nathaniel snorted. "She has a mind like father's, too sharp for her own good." His pale blue eyes narrowed. "What exactly are your intentions?" "My intentions are honorable," said Blackwood, stiff now, "and I would not presume without your father's approval. Then a word of advice: there are things about this family that would turn your blood to ice. Victoria is not for you or any outsider. Leave her alone." Before Blackwood could respond, a scream tore across the grounds, so raw and full of agony that both men froze. It was no animal, no accident, but the voice of a human being, in the grip of something unspeakable. The sound ended abruptly, leaving a silence that pressed against the walls. Nathaniel dropped his glass, the brandy pooling around his boots. What in God's name was that, Blackwood demanded, already moving to help? "Nothing," Nathaniel said too quickly, his voice brittle. "One of the kitchen boys, that's all." But his trembling hands betrayed the lie. "That was no kitchen accident. Someone is in terrible distress. I must insist." "You will leave now." Nathaniel snapped, his tone harsh. "The roads are dangerous at night. Our overseer will handle it." Blackwood realized that pressing would close the door on any future access to Raven's Rest. He forced himself to retreat, made his excuses, and allowed himself to be led out to the courtyard where his horse waited. As the mist thickened and the air cooled, he prepared to mount, only to see a flash of white darting through the columns. Victoria ran toward him, her hair unbound, her pale dress fluttering like ghostly smoke. "Dr. Blackwood," she called softly, glancing back toward the house as though pursued. "A moment, please." He stepped into the shadow of an ancient oak to meet her, his concern mounting as he saw her flushed cheeks, her wild eyes, and the faint metallic tang of blood in the air around her. "You must not come here again," she whispered urgently, clutching his sleeve with surprising strength. "Father, what he does you cannot know. For your own safety, forget me." He asked if she was in danger, and she gave a hollow laugh. "Danger? No. I am becoming, we all are. But not all survive the process." Her gaze turned toward the witch house, lit faintly in the distance. "The covenant," she whispered. "The older ones demand sacrifice. 13 souls before the next dark moon." Tonight was only preparation. Then she looked directly into his eyes, urgent and fierce. "If he invites you to a ceremony, refuse. No matter what he offers, refuse." She slipped away into the shadows before he could question her further. Blackwood rode back to Charleston through a night that had fallen unnaturally still. No wind, no animal cries, only the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves and the whisper of Spanish moss swaying like tattered shrouds. Twice he thought he saw shapes moving alongside him, and once he stopped sharply, convinced something had followed him, but the mist revealed nothing. He reached the outskirts of the city just after midnight. As he passed a roadside tavern, the Sailor's Rest, a crash of glass and a surge of shouting spilled into the night. Then a man stumbled from the doorway and collapsed in the road before Blackwood's horse. Blackwood reined in sharply and leapt from his horse to the man sprawled in the dirt, the glow from the tavern door revealing a sailor, bruised, bleeding from a split lip and shaking with terror. "Help me!" the man gasped, clutching his coat. "They're after me. They know I saw." saw what Blackwood asked. Aware of the silent figures gathered in the tavern doorway, men standing as if carved from wood, their stillness unnatural. "Bellamy's ship," the sailor whispered, "the one that docks where no record is kept." I saw them unloading. Not cargo. People. Chained. Not slaves, something worse. His eyes darted past Blackwood. "They're coming, God help me." 3 men advanced with uncanny precision, their blank faces fixed on the sailor, one carrying a rope, another a heavy cudgel. Blackwood stepped in front of the fallen man. "This man needs a doctor," he said. "I am Jonathan Blackwood, and he is under my care." The cudgel-bearer replied in a dead mechanical tone, "This does not concern you. He is drunk. We are returning him to his ship." "He's been beaten, not drunk," Blackwood retorted, hauling the sailor up. "If he's committed an offense, take it to the authorities." For a moment, violence seemed inevitable, but then the 3 exchanged a silent glance and stepped back. "Very well, Doctor," the leader said flatly. "But Mr. Bellamy will hear of this." They turned as one and walked away, like puppets pulled by the same string. Blackwood helped the sailor onto his horse and walked the rest of the way to Charleston. By the time they reached his home on Trad Street, the man was half conscious, mumbling of eyes in the dark and the hungry ones beneath. After treating him, Blackwood noted the bruises were minor, but his pupils were constricted as if drugged his skin cold and clammy. Once the man slept under a dose of tincture, Blackwood sat down to write his mind, connecting this strange encounter with the Bellamys, their silent servants, Victoria's cryptic warnings, and the whispered covenant. Days later, while treating Elijah Parker, a corpulent merchant who supplied Raven's Rest, their conversation turned to the family. Parker, wincing under the doctor's hands as he bandaged an inflamed foot, spoke freely. "Bellamy arrived with nothing but a rotten ship, and now look at him. Wealthiest man in the colony ships, never lost crops, never fail, even during the war he prospered. It ain't natural." Blackwood remarked on Bellamy's reputation for shrewdness. Parker snorted. "Shrewd, yes, but I've never seen anyone so lucky. He hardly ages. And in 1782, when there was a planned slave revolt, most rebels were hanged, but Bellamy took his own men to that cursed stone house. No one saw them again, but for weeks the chimney smoked and the smell. It wasn't flesh. It was something sweet, like rotting flowers." Blackwood said nothing, but the merchant's words echoed the terrified sailors. Not cargo. People. Something worse. That night, he wrote to an old colleague in Edinburgh, asking for any records on colonial occult practices. While waiting, he questioned those who had crossed paths with Bellamy and heard of ships unloading only at night, of Constance Bellamy's body covered in moving marks during childbirth, and of her never aging a day since. His visit to Reverend Sullivan, a frail but sharp-eyed clergyman, revealed still more. In 1760, Bellamy arrived with a French partner, Henri Laveau, who a year later vanished after whispering to the Reverend about rituals older than Christianity, about Bellamy bringing knowledge rather than cargo from the old world. Soon after, a dismembered body washed ashore headless, and the journal Laveau had entrusted to Sullivan disappeared from under lock and key. The Reverend remembered one name, the Order of the Eternal Dawn, a cult from London, who worshipped beings older than man seeking immortality through blood and forbidden ceremonies. "I have never set foot on that plantation," Sullivan warned, gripping Blackwood's wrist. "There is something in that man's eyes that does not belong in a child of God." Weeks later, Blackwood's reply from Edinburgh arrived, fragments of a journal from 1692 describing the same order. It told of men who believed the world was thin, that under certain stars the veil tore, and what lay beyond answered to blood. It described rituals that began with animals and ended with humans, ceremonies that opened doorways through which things came crawling, things that warped flesh and left marks that burned like iron. The order fled south after one such ritual helped ignite the Salem trials. They brought with them a Caribbean tea, brewed under the new moon with blood said to slow aging, and open the mind to voices from the other side, until those who drank it became something no longer entirely human. The journal ended in mid-sentence, its author devoured by the very knowledge he had tried to expose. That night, Blackwood dreamed of Victoria Bellamy at the edge of a black pool lit from within by writhing lights, her face splitting open like a mask as tendrils of darkness uncoiled from the horror beneath. They reached for him, whispering promises of power. He woke drenched in sweat as dawn broke over Charleston's rooftops, the sound of those whispers still clinging to his mind. At dawn, though, haunted by what he had learned, Blackwood knew he could not abandon his investigation. Too many lives hung in the balance. He continued to find reasons to return to Raven's Rest, treating minor ailments among the household and laborers each visit, offering glimpses of something deeper. A slave with a persistent cough allowed him to study the quarters. A burned kitchen maid gave him access to the house, and with every excuse he noted more of the strange symbols carved into door frames, patterns on floor tiles echoing those etched into the silver teacups, and rooms unnaturally cold despite the sweltering Carolina summer. He tried repeatedly to catch sight of the old stone witch house, but it was hidden deep in the estate, and the blank-eyed Bellamy slaves, who always seemed to appear whenever he drifted from his assigned path, ensured he never got close. During these visits, he found the family distant. Thaddeus often absent, Constance polite but detached, Nathaniel avoiding him entirely, and Victoria, once the woman who had captivated him, deliberately elusive, though he sometimes caught her watching him with an unreadable expression. Late in June, however, Blackwood came across Thomas Bellamy beneath an ancient oak, the boy absorbed in a copy of Paradise Lost. Unlike his siblings, Thomas seemed misplaced in his own family, sensitive and hesitant, where the others were self-assured and cold. As Blackwood approached, Thomas started guiltily, but relaxed when the doctor asked gently about Milton. The boy spoke quietly, running a finger over the worn leather cover, quoting, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Sometimes I feel that way about Raven's Rest." Coaxing him to explain, Blackwood listened as Thomas glanced around to make sure they were alone. "This place changes people," he whispered. "I've seen what it does, what happens in the witch house. I followed them once. They tie people to a stone table, chant in red robes, cut them, and something comes out of the shadows. I ran. I've never told anyone. Now Father says the next ceremony is mine. It talks to me in my dreams, says I belong to it." Blackwood asked when, and Thomas whispered July 11th. "Less than 2 weeks. They've been keeping people in the cellar for weeks. Father says this time the stars will be right. This time the older ones will give their greatest gift, transformation. I've seen what happens to the servants who come back from that house. They aren't the same. They obey without thinking. I don't want to become like that. You have to help me, Doctor. Please." Blackwood promised to get him out, though even as he said the words, he wondered how to break someone free from a house where every movement was watched. Before they could say more, Victoria appeared on the path. Calm and poised, she called Thomas away with a tone that revealed nothing, then turned to Blackwood with eyes that seemed fathomless. "You've been asking questions," she said without preamble. "That is unwise. Blackwood met her gaze. I'm concerned for you, for Thomas. Whatever your father is doing. You know nothing of my father, she cut in coldly. We commune with powers that existed before your God. We preserve knowledge that burns ordinary minds. Blackwood tried to reach her. Victoria, this isn't you speaking. You're not, I am Bellamy. She said, her voice suddenly layered with other tones, inhuman and resonant. The blood of the covenant flows through me. I have tasted eternity, Doctor. We could offer it to you. Father sees potential in you. Join us live for centuries or get out of our way. At what cost? Blackwood demanded. The lives of innocents, your own humanity. For an instant, something flickered in her gaze, doubt or memory, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Humanity is a brief candle, she said, stepping closer, her perfume masking a faint metallic scent like blood. What we offer is an eternal flame. Then she turned away, her movements disturbingly fluid. Do not come back unless you are ready to join us. And stop filling Thomas's head with fantasies of escape. There is no escape from what we are. As she disappeared into the garden, Blackwood knew that Thomas's life was in immediate danger. Back in Charleston, he tried to alert the authorities, but no one would listen. The Bellamys were too powerful, their wealth too entrenched. The magistrates scoffed at talk of sacrifice and cults. And when Blackwood mentioned the sailor who had witnessed Bellamy's secret cargo, the magistrate's expression hardened into something very much like Thaddeus's own. Outside the office, a black Bellamy carriage stood waiting, its driver silent, watching. The message was clear, they knew. Alone, Blackwood began to prepare. He gathered a pistol scalpel's laudanum strong enough to render a man unconscious. A crucifix and holy water from Reverend Sullivan, who with solemn eyes offered both without question, and purchased a detailed map of Raven's Rest from a surveyor. As July 11th drew closer, the days crawled, and the city's polite society seemed to Blackwood a nest of vipers. He sent a coded note to Thomas, but it was turned away at the gate. On the night of July 10th, Blackwood rode from Charleston under a starlit sky, dressed in dark clothing, his face smeared with ash, a pistol at his waist, and laudanum, salt and water in his satchel. The air was thick and hot cicadas droning like alien drums, the stars unnaturally bright. He tethered his horse in a copse of trees near Raven's Rest and crept forward on foot. The plantation was silent. Even the slave quarters were dark, lifeless. Avoiding the main house, he followed the map until the stone witch house rose before him, a squat, ancient structure that seemed to drink in the light. The air around it was colder than the rest of the night, and from beneath its door, a faint glow leaked out. Chanting low and inhuman pulsed from within. Taking cover behind an oak, he stuffed cloth into his ears to dull the sound, recognizing its hypnotic rhythm. Through the night, carriages arrived one after another, bearing Charleston's elite merchants, judges, even the magistrate who had mocked him, and a clergyman with his collar visible under a cloak. Each of them disappeared into the witch house, and the chanting grew louder, more insistent, as the stars wheeled overhead and the dark of the moon crept closer. The carriages stopped short of the witch house, their passengers emerging into torchlight, where a blank-eyed slave appeared, as if conjured from the shadows. Each guest performed a strange gesture at the door hand to forehead, then heart, then to the silver pendants gleaming at their necks before vanishing inside. The carriages rolled silently away to the main stables, their drivers moving with the same unnatural precision that Blackwood had come to dread. As dawn neared, the chanting ceased, and the visitors drifted out in pairs and trios, their faces lit with a rapture of exhaustion, like revelers returning from some secret indulgence. They touched hands, exchanged knowing glances, and melted back into their carriages, the departures staggered, so that no trail of wealth and power was left on the road back to Charleston. Blackwood was preparing to retreat when the door opened again. Thaddeus emerged, Nathaniel at his side, dragging between them a half-conscious laborer, the man's head hanging his feet, furrowing the dew-soaked earth. Across his arms and neck, shallow cuts formed patterns Blackwood had already seen carved in wood and cast in silver. They hauled him toward a small outbuilding near the main house and disappeared inside, leaving the plantation silent once more. Blackwood slipped away into the paling dark mindset tonight under the moonless sky. This horror would end. He tried to rest, but sleep was denied him. When at last he drifted into slumber in the heat of the afternoon, it was not rest, but vision. He saw the witch house from above the roof stripped away to reveal a circle of red-robed figures around a stone altar. Thomas lay upon it, eyes wide-mouthed, locked in a scream. No sound escaped. Thaddeus stood over him with the curved blade, and behind Thaddeus came something vast. A shifting shadow writhing with limbs and mouths and eyes that turned inward and outward at once. Blackwood woke with a gasp, heart pounding, the taste of the dream still raw in his throat, half convinced some presence had touched him across the distance. He shook himself and turned back to the notes from Edinburgh. One detail he had overlooked now burned bright. The older ones feared certain things. Salt burns them. The smoke of sage disrupts their communion. Cold forged iron shatters their hold. And most importantly, their dependence on the stars interrupt the ritual at its peak, and the backlash will tear both creature and cultist apart. The journal told of a failed rite in Salem where an eclipse had torn the veil before it was ready. The thing that came through consumed its summoners, leaving the few survivors mad, wandering the forest, speaking only of eyes that devoured themselves. Blackwood prepared as the last day bled away. Salt bundles of sage, a heavy iron poker taken from his landlady's hearth, laudanum pistol and scalpel, all went into his satchel. Before leaving, he wrote a detailed letter to Reverend Sullivan, sealing it with instructions to forward it to Boston and Philadelphia if he did not return by midday. If he failed, someone else would know. That night, under a lightless sky, he rode for Raven's Rest. The plantation was alive with fire. Torches lined the avenue, the stables, the long approach to the witch house. Red-robed figures crossed the grounds carrying bowls, vessels, and bundles that stank of herbs or perhaps blood. The air was electric with anticipation. From the shelter of the trees, Blackwood saw the procession, Thaddeus leading Constance, Nathaniel, and Victoria behind him. His robe was nearly black in the torchlight, embroidered with golden symbols, a circlet of black metal set with glowing stones crowning his head. Constance and Nathaniel wore red, while Victoria, striking in pure white, seemed set apart for some darker role. Behind them came the others, the judge, the merchants, the magistrate, the clergyman, and more. At the rear, two men dragged Thomas. The boy's hands were bound with what looked like braided human hair. His white shift stained from the dirt, his bare feet leaving streaks in the path as he struggled and shouted. "No, I won't do it. You can't make me." His words fell on ears as blank as stone. Blackwood slipped through the underbrush, circling the building until he was crouched beside the door. Inside, candlelight turned the chamber into a nest of gold and blood. Hundreds of flames lined the walls, illuminating the altar at the center. Its surface stained dark, and the spiraling complex symbols painted in crimson across the floor. The air was thick with incense that barely covered a deeper smell. Sweet rot open graves, the persistence of death. Thaddeus entered first, lifting his arms, the stones in his crown, scattering multicolored fire across the walls. "Brothers and sisters," he intoned tonight, "the stars align. Tonight the veil opens. Tonight I offer the purest gift, the blood of my line freely given." Murmurs of reverence rolled around the circle as Thomas was dragged forward. "It's not freely given," the boy cried, tears running down his face. "I don't want this, Father. Please." Thaddeus turned, his face shifting as if something beneath his skin had begun to show through. "You will embrace your heritage," he said, his voice like a blade. "Tonight, you take your place among us." The moment Thomas was pulled past the door, Blackwood struck. He fired once, the shot exploding in the night, hitting one captor in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. With his other hand, he swung the iron poker hard against the skull of the second. The man dropped instantly, his hood falling back to reveal the blank-eyed face of a Bellamy slave. Blackwood grabbed Thomas, pulling him free as shouts erupted within. Thaddeus's voice cut through the din like a whip. "Seize him!" Figures turned, knives gleaming, moving as one. "You came," Thomas gasped, clutching Blackwood's arm. "You actually came." "Stay behind me," Blackwood ordered. "Run for the trees when I say." He backed toward the door, pistol-raised scalpel flashing in his other hand. The cultists spread their daggers, catching the light. Thaddeus pushed forward, eyes burning with a terrible glow. "Dr. Blackwood," he said with eerie calm, "you disappoint me. I hoped you might join us. Victoria spoke highly of your potential." "I've seen enough," Blackwood answered. "You are murderers, parasites, and worse." Thaddeus smiled, baring teeth that looked too sharp in the flickering light. "We serve a greater purpose. The older ones grant wealth, power, long life. They could grant you the same." He lifted his crown, the stones pulsing like alien hearts. "Put it on, Doctor. See what we see." "At what cost?" Blackwood demanded. "The lives of innocence. The soul of your own son's soul." Thaddeus scoffed. "A myth. There is only flesh and the power that moves it. Energy can be consumed, harnessed, preserved." As he spoke, the room grew cold shadows, deepening, a low vibration building in the air until it seemed to rattle bone. Constance raised her hands. "They come," she whispered. On the walls, the shadows began to move on their own, bending into shapes no human body could take. "Nathaniel, Victoria, prepare your brother," Thaddeus ordered. Nathaniel stepped forward, face set in grim resolve. Victoria hesitated. Blackwood met her eyes. "Victoria," he said softly, "you know this is wrong. Help us." For a moment, something broke through. She pulled a curved dagger from her robe and turned, plunging it into Nathaniel's chest. "Run!" she screamed. "I'll hold them off." Nathaniel fell, blood spreading across his chest. Thaddeus roared, lunging for her. Blackwood seized Thomas and pulled him into the night. As they went, he risked one glance back to see her framed in the doorway, arms wide, shadows boiling around her into a vast, formless shape of eyes and reaching limbs. "Don't look back," he shouted. "Just run. Together." They sprinted for the tree line as the cultists recovered from their shock and the chase began. Shouts rang out, boots pounding the earth. A pistol cracked. A ball passed so close to Blackwood's ear, he felt the air part. Another struck near Thomas, spraying dirt. The boy stumbled, almost falling, but Blackwood caught him and hauled him upright. "I can't," Thomas gasped, his voice raw. "The preparation, they drugged me." "You can," Blackwood said through clenched teeth, dragging him forward. "Just a little farther. The trees will cover us." They plunged into the woods, the canopy swallowing the starlight. Roots clutched at their feet, branches lashed their faces, and the sound of pursuit drew nearer with every heartbeat. "This way," Blackwood hissed, pulling Thomas down a slick ravine. Speed mattered more than silence now. At last they burst into the grove, where his horse waited, the animal stamping and tossing its head at the smell of smoke and fear. For a brief moment the shouts faded. Perhaps the cultists had lost the trail. Blackwood hoisted Thomas onto the saddle, swung up behind him, then the ground heaved beneath them. It was no natural quake, but a single violent impact, as if something massive had fallen from an unimaginable height. They turned to see the witch house blazing with a light that defied color, an unearthly spectrum that burned the eyes, that hinted at angles and dimensions beyond comprehension. Shadows poured from the building like tentacles reaching for the main house and beyond, devouring torchlight as they spread. "What's happening, Thomas?" whispered, his face pale in that impossible glow. "I don't know," Blackwood said, spurring the horse. "But we have to get away." Then a scream, one voice, but filled with 100 tones, a sound of agony and triumph that split the night like a blade. It was Victoria. It climbed and climbed, passing beyond the range of human hearing, until it was felt instead of heard, a pressure that crushed their lungs. The light surged upward, a column of radiance that pierced the clouds and twisted them into a spinning vortex that plunged toward the ground like a dark finger. Wind tore across the fields, carrying a stench of flowers and rot so thick it coated their throats. "The ritual," Thomas said faintly. "It's broken." Victoria's sacrifice, she broke the pattern. They can't control it. They're coming through without direction. Another shock wave ripped the ground. Screams echoed from the plantation. Human voices rising and then cutting off as the shadows swept over the main house, the slave quarters, everything. Where the darkness passed, silence remained. "Hold on," Blackwood said, heels digging into the horse's flanks. They rode hard through the night, not stopping until the lamps of Charleston came into view, the sun bleeding up over the horizon. While the city stirred to life, unaware of the nightmare consuming Raven's Rest. Blackwood carried Thomas straight to Reverend Sullivan. The boy collapsed shaking, and Blackwood recounted everything in the Reverend's study. The ritual was broken, Sullivan murmured, fingers knotted in prayer. "If your account is true, what has happened, there is beyond even their imagining." Blackwood nodded grimly. Those shadows spared no one, slave or master. The things they call the Reverend said are not bound by human morality. They are older than sin, older than man. If called without a guide, they consume everything. "We need to alert the authorities," Blackwood said, though he knew the futility. "I will write to my contacts in Philadelphia and Boston," Sullivan replied. "But for now the boy must be hidden. If any of them survived, they will come for him. I'll watch over him," Blackwood said, "until we know what's left." That same day, news swept through Charleston. A catastrophe had destroyed Raven's Rest. Witnesses spoke of a fire so fierce the smoke was visible for miles. A black pillar stabbing the sky. Those who approached to help were driven back by a wall of unnatural darkness. Some swore they heard chanting inside, not cries for help, but a language that scoured the mind. Others swore they saw shapes moving in the smoke bodies with too many limbs, wings, at impossible angles. By dawn, the plantation burned the flames, devouring wood and stone. Buckets of water turned to steam before touching the blaze. Even the oaks were stripped to skeletal black fingers. No heat reached beyond the boundary, and no bodies were ever found. It was as if every living soul had been erased. In the days that followed, as the Bellamy's influence crumbled, the truth surfaced. Ledgers in Thaddeus's hand, tracked decades of disappearances. Sailors, laborers, wanderers. Journals written in a voice that was not entirely human told of the bargain struck long ago in London power wealth and a lifespan measured in centuries in exchange for building a sanctuary where the veil was thin. He had crossed the ocean with Henri Laveau, a Haitian Vodou initiate, who guided him to South Carolina, a land ripe with ambition and cruelty. A place where victims vanished without question, where powerful men were ready to be seduced. Most shocking was the list of names. The magistrate who mocked Blackwood was a Third Circle initiate. The judge who hanged rebels was a keeper of the covenant. Merchants, clergymen, even the governor's secretary, all bound by the same blood oath. Panic followed. Ships fled the harbor under darkness. Mansions stood empty overnight. Those who remained claimed coercion, but few believed them. The order's roots were deeper than any of us imagined, Sullivan said a week later, sifting through the evidence. It explains everything, Blackwood replied quietly. The city's prosperity, the strange illnesses, the unnatural vigor of men like Thaddeus, the things I saw in his children's eyes. The journals spoke of the price the longer they communed with the older ones, the less human they became. Thaddeus wrote of dreams that belonged to other lifetimes, of appetites no human indulgence could satisfy, of thoughts that were not his own. Thomas Bellamy, saved by Victoria's sacrifice, grew up under Sullivan's care. For years he woke screaming about shadows with too many eyes, about the voice that whispered in the dark. In time he found peace through faith and atonement, dedicating his life to charity and the fight against the darkness that had destroyed his family. He founded the Bellamy Trust, a secret network that investigated occult practices wherever the vulnerable disappeared. Thomas never married, vowing that the Bellamy bloodline would die with him. Blackwood remained only long enough to ensure the boy's safety. His testimony, combined with the journals and the confessions of cultists, became a report so disturbing that the new federal government sealed it. Then he left Charleston for Boston. His work changed. No longer obsessed with reanimation, he studied the mind, its malleability, the influence of belief on reality. In 1798, he joined an expedition to Egypt, chasing signs of the older ones in ancient carvings. There, beneath the Sphinx, he found symbols identical to those carved into the witch house. One day, he entered a newly opened chamber alone. He never returned. Despite extensive searches, no trace of him was ever found, though. For decades, there were rumors of a white-haired physician in remote parts of Africa and the Middle East, speaking every tongue his age, impossible to guess. Whether these stories were of Blackwood or of something that once was him remains unknown. Raven's Rest never recovered. For decades, the ruins stood blackened and silent. Travelers spoke of ghostly lights on moonless nights, of whispers without mouths, of shadows that moved against the wind. In time, the earth reclaimed the plantation, leaving only a weathered stone in St. Philip's churchyard, marking the death of Thomas Bellamy in 1845. Yet the legacy of the Bellamys did not end. Across the South, new cults emerged, their rites echoing the journals Savannah in 1819, New Orleans in 1837, and in 1851, a ship's captain claimed to see red-robed figures on an uninhabited Carolina island, lit by a strange, bending light. Even now, whispers speak of a hidden society descended from the Bellamys, gathered in the dark of the moon, where the veil is thin, waiting to open the door again. Did they survive? Do the older ones still wait? Perhaps some questions are better left unanswered, but the last words of Thomas Bellamy still carry on the wind. They are patient. They exist beyond time. They wait, and when the stars align again, they will find new hands to open the door. Sleep well, and tonight lock your doors and fasten your windows. Some shadows never truly fade. Until next time, remember, the past is never truly dead. It's not even past.